In this video, I'm going to look at a JavaScript program that sort of traces out a Lissajous curve or figure. So it's just a particular kind of parametric equation where the x and the y in a two-dimensional system depend on some number times sine of some other number times t. I don't have a phase constant here like they do, but I have my a as a cosine. So I'm going to have a and b, so some number times sine and cosine of a and some number times cosine of b, or sine of b, and then you sort of let time run and it traces through some pattern and then it begins to repeat itself. So anyway, that's what the program does. Let's see it. So here I'm doing my x's are a times cosine of some integer m times t, and my y is b times sine of nt, and then I allow them to use this sort of range input to change the a. So maybe I'm going to make it wider than it is tall, and there is these integers in the cosine and sine, and what's important is mainly the ratio. So it's if they're the same, it's going to be something like a circle or an ellipse. If they're different, then it traces out some fancier figure. So I'm going to sort of run through time and keep the pattern, and then eventually it starts to repeat itself. Okay, and then if I make any changes, then it stops it and we can start again. So I decreased b, so it's a little squatter. What if I change the 8? And I didn't sort of erase it as soon as they changed something, but I could have. So we could make this a better interface than what I've got here. Okay, so that's what we're playing with here. Okay. So this is just the main HTML, the header, a little paragraph explaining it. Here is the where the range type of input with a step of 0.01. And same thing for A and B. So that was what I would tend to call a slider, is a range input. And then I have selects for M and N, and I pre-selected 3 for the M and 7 for the N. And then I had some button that calls a function that's going to establish some variables and start a timer. And I have, anytime they change one of the inputs, I call this function called stop. Okay. All right. So here we go. This is the bottom of my SVG. I have a big SVG. That's the last of my HTML. It's the big scalar vector graphics element. And then here is my script. So everything else is, other than this sort of empty SVG, is my script. I'm going to create all the things that go inside my SVG, but they are not, I can't use a simple create element. At least I don't think so. So I'm going to define a sort of a namespace, and that extended namespace is going to allow me to create elements that sort of belong in the SVG, rectangles, circles, lines, or these things that go inside an SVG. Okay, I'm setting up some rectangle size and grid size. So I have in sort of an 8 by 8 square, and these are 60 So I played with the size to fit on my screen with my resolution on a tiny little laptop here. I have a time set to 0 and a timer ID. If they change anything, I'm gonna stop the timer. So I need to have an ID of the timer so I can stop it. I have parameters for the A, B, C, and A, B, M, and N, and then the X and Y that we saw. So I have variables for A, B, M, N, and then the X and the Y. And then in normal geometry, I would have the center be the origin, but that's not the origin in HTML. In SVG, you're going to work from this upper corner, and move to the right will be positive X's, and going down will be positive Y's. And so I'm going to shift that down to the center. So I have a mid X and a mid Y that I'm going to add to everything. I'm going to allow the fact that in a display like this, the positive Y direction is down. I could change that if I wanted to by just always subtracting a Y value, subtracting the B times sign instead of adding it. Or I could, instead of adding to my time, I could subtract from my time to get it to go around sort of in the proper direction, but I'm not doing either of those things. Okay, but that's what mid X and mid Y were for, to get me to shift to the middle of that thing. Okay. And I say that I'm going to keep working with the SVG figure that I made, so I made it a global variable. And I called a function called makeGrid, which makes the grid, makes these, and I just did it by having a set of rectangular elements. So I had a nested loop that went from I equals 0 up to grid size, which was 8. And I use this create element NS. So I'm going to that expanded namespace, the SVGNS namespace, and I'm getting a rectangle element, and I am setting some of its attributes. A rectangle has an X and a Y, where it's located horizontally and vertically, what its height and width are. And I'm going to make it white is the fill, and then the stroke, the sort of border, is black. So that was this grid. So that nested loops gives me this grid of X's and of white rectangles with black borders. It gives me my sort of XY coordinate system, my Cartesian coordinate system. The button, when you click the button that called trace, I set time back to 0. If I'd done anything else along the way, it sets the time back to 0 and starts again. Disables the button, so I'm going to start a timer at some point, and I don't want 2 timers going. I'm clearing out anything I might have previously had, and I'm making a new grid, and I'm getting my A, my B, my M, my N, and setting my X and Y, their initial values. Remember that the Y was involved sign, and sign of t equals 0 is going to be 0. And this one involved cosine, and so the cosine is going to be at 0 or 1. I'm creating a circle. So the circle is going to move around in time. And so I'm creating a circle, putting its a circle element has a CX, a CY, the center position X, the center position Y, and a radius. And I'm making it a black. That should not be an O, that should be a 0, but it was interpreting that that O as a 0, so let me fix that. But I'm making a circle and adding the circle, and then I'm starting a timer. Okay. Then I am incrementing, this is the tick, and the tick is called every 10 milliseconds or every 100th of a second. And I'm sort of trying to make it to some extent real time. And so I'm adding 0.01 to my time. And I'm finding the new X and the new Y. So I'm calling it X2 and Y2. And then I'm moving my circle to that new position. And then I'm taking my old X and Y and my new X and Y and creating a line that goes from the original XY to the new XY. And again, the stroke, this is a line, so there's only a stroke. I'm making it black with a thickness of 1, and I'm adding that line to my SVG, and I'm updating my X and Y. And here is the stop button. So if this was called, they didn't click a button that said stop, but if they changed any of the input parameters, it called stop. And so we are setting the disabled property of the button to false. In other words, we're enabling the button so that they can start again. We're clearing out the time interval, stopping the timer. And they've just changed one of the parameters to call this. So I'm sort of getting all my getting my A and B parameters in particular and displaying them. I'm grabbing them. I also grab them at the beginning of trace, but I wanted to also display the A and the B on the page. There's my display of A and my display of B. So I was grabbing them here also for the purposes of displaying them. If I didn't want to display them, then I didn't need this because it's also in trace. So it's a little redundant in terms of grabbing the values, but I did want to also display the values. And again, so this was just playing around with SVG and a timer and a parametric equation. And let's just play one more time. What do I want? Let me try 5 and 7. What does that look like? And again, it just traces out this pattern, and then at some point, it connects up and starts repeating itself. And we are the rectangles, the grid is made of rectangles. The little ball is a circle element of which there's 1, and then there's like, thousands by now of, or at least hundreds of tiny little lines connecting one point to the next. Okay, that's what I wanted to show you. Fun with the Lissajous functions or Lissajous figures. Thanks for your attention.